Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Kenneth Kunz. I'm a literacy researcher, author, and assistant professor of literacy at Monmouth University in New Jersey. A proud ILA board member, I'll be co-hosting tonight's fireside chat. We're so glad that you're here. With me tonight is our co-host and dear colleague, Dr. Diane Lapp, who is a distinguished professor of education at San Diego State University, where her work continues to be very applied to schools. Diane is also an instructional coach at Health Science Middle School and Health Sciences High and Middle College. A member of both the California and the International Reading Halls of Fame, she is currently the chair of ILA's Literacy Research Panel and the president of the Reading Hall of Fame. Hi, Diane. We are joined tonight by a team of regarded literacy experts and advocates. Allow me to introduce them. First, I'm going to begin with Miss Kia Brown-Dudley. She is a current member of the board of ILA and is a former New York City Department of Education literacy specialist who serves as the director of programs and partnerships for the Education Partners, the global consultancy division of GEMS Education. She partners with educators and leading organizations to create customized, blended, hybrid professional learning experiences, empowering educators to unlock the genius in every child. Ms. Brown-Dudley focuses on the connection between oral language and literacy development, using rich discussions to build conversational and academic language and knowledge, writing, and reading skills and competencies. Welcome, Kia.
Hello, everyone. I would have the honor to introduce you to our next guest, Dr. Sonia Cabell. And Sonia is an assistant professor in the School of Teacher Education and the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State University. She has previously worked as a second grade teacher and literacy coach. Her research focuses on early language and literacy intervention, with a particular interest in preventing reading difficulties among young children living in poverty. Dr. Cabell has authored over 50 publications, including peer-reviewed articles, a book chapters, early childhood language and literacy curricula. She currently serves as an associate editor for the scholarly journal Early Literacy Research Quarterly. She also served as a principal investigator or co-principal investigator on grants totaling approximately $6 million. Welcome, Sonia.
Dr. Patricia Edwards, a member of the Reading Hall of Fame, is a professor of language and literacy at Michigan State University and the 2017-2018 Jean S. Shaw Visiting Researcher at Harvard Graduate School of Education. She is the past president of the International Literacy Association and the Literacy Research Association. She has authored several articles, books, and book chapters on family engagement, as well as 2 nationally acclaimed family literacy programs. She is nationally and internationally known and recognized as an expert in parent and family involvement, home, school, community partnerships, multicultural literacy, early literacy, and family and intergenerational literacy, especially among poor and minority children. Welcome, Pat Edwards.
Our next guest, Dr. Doug Fisher, is teaching right now, but he will join us as soon as he gets out of class. But let me introduce him anyway. He's a professor and the chair of the Department of Educational Administration at San Diego State University. He's the former president of the International Literacy Association and also a board member of the Literacy Research Association. As you know, he's a very widely published author and researcher. Doug is the founding editor of Health Sciences High and Middle College, which has won many distinguished awards throughout the country. His areas of expertise focus on supporting teachers and administrators in designing and sharing equitable instructional practice for all children.
Miss Lisa Forehand, the principal of Harborside Elementary in Chula Vista, California, spent 17 years teaching grades K to 5, most of that time in grades K to 2. Currently a doctoral student at San Diego State University, Lisa's focus is building strong literacy teachers across all grade levels. Her current work around consistent, powerful small group instruction and knowing reading behaviors is reflected in her doctoral studies and is transferring over to implementation during our current times of distance learning. Welcome, Lisa.
Next, I have the pleasure of introducing our next guest, Dr. Lesley Mandel Morrow, who is a distinguished professor of education at Rutgers University and the director of the Center for Literacy Development. She's the past president of ILA and past president of the Reading Hall of Fame. Dr. Morrow has published 35 books and over 300 research articles and book chapters. She has received the most prestigious awards for research, teaching, and service from ILA, Rutgers, and also from LRA. Lesley's areas of expertise are early literacy development, family literacy, and the organization and management of literacy classroom routines and classrooms so that they can be very well managed. Welcome, Lesley.
Dr. Susan Newman, a member of the Reading Hall of Fame, is a professor of education at New York University. Previously, she served as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education. A former board member of the International Reading Association and co-editor of Reading Research Quarterly, Susan focuses on improving children's early literacy development. Her research and teaching interests include oral language and vocabulary development through print and digital media, curriculum, and early reading instruction in and out of school, pre-K through grade 3 for children who live in poverty. Welcome, Susan. We will get started in just a minute, but first, I wanted to let you know that this event is also being streamed live on Facebook with a recording available immediately afterward. Also, archives will be available through Zoom on demand within a day or two and through YouTube within the week. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Let's get started. So Diane and I described this first question as sort of a speed dating of sorts, where we wanted all of the panelists to be able to have a few minutes to answer this question alphabetically, so that way you can get to know all of our members. So I'm going to pose this first question to Kia, a fellow ILA board member. And Kia, the question that launches our fireside chat this evening is, what educational suggestions about equitable and comprehensive early literacy education would you like to share with the new Secretary of Education?
Thank you, Ken and Diane, and it's such an honor to be on a panel with such esteemed guests. First of all, I would just reflect for a moment and think, in whose service do we work, right? We are truly doing the work on behalf of children and families. And we know that research shows that providing high quality education for children before they turn 5 yields significant long-term benefits. And so if the main goal of the department is to strengthen the federal commitment to ensuring access to equal educational opportunity for every child, and we're using policy as that vehicle, my suggestion is to create a comprehensive policy framework strengthening childcare and funding for high quality education starting at birth. So I know there are brilliant people doing important policy work, and we have made great gains with universal pre-K. However, as we think about the events of 2020, it really highlights the need for ongoing action to ensure that every child has access to high quality educational settings with skilled, and I'm going to say this nice and loud so everyone can hear, and highly compensated early childhood educators, especially for daycare and home care, which we know are primarily minority and women-owned businesses. This includes having access to resources that promotes physical, emotional, and academic well-being for all stakeholders. I really feel like it's important that there's increased collaboration with the Department of Health and Human Services, including the Administration for Children and Families, thinking about Head Start and making that link. Also, the Office of Early Childhood Development, which serves as a catalyst to create collective impact to support early learning and care for our nation's children and families, is critical. Because we only have a few minutes, I can't get down in the nitty-gritty of what I would want in that policy, but I would say it's also really important that we leverage the relationships with institutions and lean on the wisdom and talent located within our historically Black colleges and universities, and also tribal colleges and universities in the creation and implementation of this framework. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Sonia. I would love to hear her thoughts.
Thank you, Kia. I also am very happy to be here. And some of my comments will echo some of Kia's comments you just heard. So all children should be given the opportunity to learn to read successfully with high quality instruction. And we can't forget that during the earliest years of life, birth to 5, a lot of critical development is taking place. And in terms of literacy learning, there's a lot of important foundation that's set for later reading, such as language development. The prevention of reading difficulties is less costly than the remediation of difficulties once they manifest, not only from an economic standpoint, but really more importantly from a human standpoint. Catching children before they fall should continue to be a key goal of our educational system. In addition, support is needed for the early care and education workforce, which has its own challenges associated with it. So the teachers of our youngest children should be given what they need to thrive in the profession. So I advocate for promoting equity in terms of both what children need and what teachers need. Another key point that I would make is that we want to make sure that in the primary grades, reading is not taught at the expense of building content knowledge. We have a history of separating the subject area of reading from content like science and social studies. And in the last 20 years or so, content area instruction has taken a short shrift in the early grades. Policies in the Reading First era lengthened reading blocks, but didn't really consider that it was at the expense of content area learning. And another way to think about this issue is to think about how can we integrate literacy and content area instruction. So research shows that this approach, integrating literacy and content area instruction, can potentially support better outcomes in both in terms of reading and content knowledge. And when we don't systematically teach content knowledge, we may be assuming that all children enter school with a common knowledge base, and therefore we may be less likely to give attention to teaching concepts that students may need to build their background knowledge so that they can better understand the text that they read. With that said, Pat, I'm going to pass it with you. What would you like to share with the new Secretary of Education?
Thank you so much, Sonia. You all have taken a lot of my points, but I'm going to say what I think I need to say. First of all, I would like for the new Secretary of Education to think of public education as the great equalizer. After all, public education is not just important, it has been coined as the great equalizer. And we must know, and we know that it is now not always function that way, and not always through the fault of those who work in it. I want the next Secretary of Education to understand and acknowledge the impacts of long-standing systemic racism. We no longer need to just talk about it, but we need to help schools address it. I want the next Secretary of Education to have an aggressive plan that was dismantle injustices and dismantle racist systems for all children in real and tangible ways. The next Secretary of Education must know that the odds stacked against many Black and Latinx students were put there on purpose, and it has been happening for generations. We need the new Secretary of Education to act with urgency to ensure that we do not lose more ground with students. We need resources to help schools, and especially early childhood centers, because in this country, early childhood has not always been equal. We have children that are in homes being served by people that are not certified, and we have a big gap. And so we need to equal the playing field for students. So with that, I'm going to stop because a lot of the points that Sonia and Kia made were ones that I had written down. So Lisa, tell us what you think.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here among such great thinkers. If I had a chance to sit with the new Secretary of Education, I would really want to talk to her about how do we grow and support biliteracy as we move forward, and looking at, dual immersion programs. And we need our students to be biliterate and actually even multilingual as we move forward. And there aren't consistent structures in place. Even for myself, I was looking for a dual immersion teacher and there was not one in Southern California to be had. So how do we recruit teachers and develop teacher prep programs to recruit quality dual immersion teachers, not just a warm body to fill a spot? And how do we create these different structures in place for dual immersion to be successful? The research shows that students of all abilities, that's sometimes pushback that we get, oh, my student has a disability, but the research shows that students of all abilities function at a higher level in a dual immersion program. And so I would just really want to see that as we move forward past 2020. And another thing to think about with dual immersion is that how do we really market that to parents, especially in lower socioeconomic areas? I know that in my school, which is one of the poorest schools in Southern California, the push sometimes from parents is, well, I want my kid to know English. And so to really let them know that they're becoming biliterate, and to see my kinders and then from kinder learning English and Spanish, full 50-50 model, and then see them in 6th grade as they are debating and thinking and reading and writing in both languages. What a powerful gift we've given them. What a leg up we've given them, especially in the lower socioeconomic communities. So if I had a chance to sit with her, I would really, or him, I would really want them to know that we really can't ignore this any longer. We really need to strive for to have biliterate children. And with that, Lesley, what would you like to talk with the new Secretary of Education about?
So I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to extend a thank you to all the teachers who on a daily basis are switching from face-to-face teaching to total remote teaching to hybrid to in-person and back again. You are the frontline workers. You are the heroes. You are to be commended. If I had the opportunity to sit down with the Secretary of Education, also I'd like to sit with the local state secretaries as well. We need to recreate the centers for reading research that we had in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. They did outstanding research that enriched the teaching of reading. Groups of scholars worked together creating what we're calling the science of reading. And I had the privilege of being asked to work at each of those centers. There was great excitement because we worked together as a group and we could accomplish so much more during that time. Now it's important to refine what we learned. We learned a great deal, but it needs to be refined. Similar to the fields of medicine and law, there are individual children involved, and therefore we need to consider the science, but also the art of teaching and include what we know from experience and in our heads and our hearts. Obviously, for this, we need funding. On a national level, I'd like to do some more research similar to the National Reading Panel Report and the Early Literacy Reading Panel Reports, and also relook at standards. And in the research that could take place on a national level, we need to look at professional development in the form of coaching. We need to look at first-year teachers that should be with master teachers for the entire year. We need to look more at the research-based strategies to accomplish the standards. And similar to what was said, family literacy programs are absolutely so important from birth until, well, on and on, but especially in early childhood, and interdisciplinary teaching, which I'll talk about more later, which also was mentioned. We need more teachers in the classroom and more time for teaching reading. In pre-K and kindergarten, we do have more than one teacher in the classroom. However, in grades 1, 2, 3, we don't. To be able to teach small groups and differentiated instruction, we need more than one teacher in a classroom. Additional teachers can be working with more groups, providing productive work for those who are not in a group. And when we co-teach, we learn from each other, we support each other and feel a responsibility to each other. Other than the Army, school is the only place that we deal with people in groups, and the groups are children. In the supermarket, in the department store, in the bank, we are dealt with one at a time, but not in school. Schools should be open 12 months a year and into the evenings. They need to be a place for adult education, a place for folks to stop by, to talk, to mingle, to engage in social activities, have a cup of coffee, feel welcome. And also, please don't forget the children in your classroom who are on grade level and above. They need instruction too to reach their potential. If they are not, we're wasting talent, and they must also be attended to, as well as our children who are at risk and in need. And now I will ask Susan to contribute her remarks.
Okay. Well, you know, sometimes it's hard to be last because all of these comments have been so on target. And I want to thank Diane and Ken for the opportunity to be here today. So what I want to do is I want to frame this question a little bit like as if I were talking to the new Secretary of Education. And as a former policy person, I feel like I want to talk about some of the issues that might affect literacy, but not directly. So my colleagues have talked about some wonderful points that need to happen in terms of literacy, but there are other issues that have been neglected in the last 4 years that we need to talk about. And so therefore I want to frame my comments in terms of what we need to fix and then what we need to create. The first thing we need to fix is we need to make all of our children feel welcome in our schools. Our transgendered children are not feeling comfortable in being able to go to school, to go into bathrooms and whatever. They are not being protected. We need to put in place strategies that allow them to feel comfortable and welcome in our school. All of our children need to feel like their school is a place, a home that they can be comfortable and engaged. Second thing we really need to do and change is that we need to influence some of the civil rights cases that have not been dealt with. There are an enormous number of civil rights abuses in many places in our country, and they've just been forgotten. They haven't been dealt with at all. And how can we say that we are a welcoming place if in fact these abuses continue to happen? Third, we need to understand that our schools and our teachers are welcome, that public school is the place to be, and we want to encourage all of, we've heard an awful lot about charter schools, and charter schools were originally designed as innovation shops to help improve many of our public schools. And so we need to welcome our public school and public school teachers back into the fold and recognize that they are important. And fourth, we need to fix the Every Child, Every Student Succeed Act. In the past, anything goes. Any kind of program has been accepted, and therefore we need to really put in place the law that it was intended to occur. Now let's talk about some of the things that, if we think about, need to happen next. Lesley mentioned this, and I think it was so critically important. We had some real success with Reading First, and we had some real success with early Reading First. What we recognized is that professional development is critical, that children need time and experience in learning how to read. And we learned a lot about what it takes to be a teacher of reading. And yet that went away, that funding went away. And so we need to put in place a new set of funding because our schools are struggling, our children are struggling, and we can't just expect that schools can do what they're able to do without additional funding. Funding is absolutely critical for our schools and our teachers. And we also need to recognize that we've learned some things through this pandemic. We've learned, for example, that we can be successful with remote education if the groups are small. So when we work with small groups of children, we can be very successful. Lesley brought it up, and it's absolutely true that we cannot have a teacher trying to teach 25 kids with differentiated instruction without additional help. So these are some of the things that I think that new Secretary of Education could really tackle. And I'd like to see her tackle them very quickly. Diane, it's up to you.
Well, you know, I wish that she had been listening. And so to help her out, what I did was jot down a few of the things, the fabulous things that you all said. So I'm going to try to just summarize this a little bit. The main focus was on the classroom teacher and the preparation of outstanding, well-prepared teachers. You all offered many suggestions for how that should happen. Hand in hand with that are equitable opportunities for children to learn language, reading, and writing. And that includes all children across races, across genders, sexes, however they define themselves. That's okay, you're welcome here. A third area that y'all talked about in various ways, learning to read within the context of the disciplines, but not as we've always known it, of just science and social studies, but working with other professionals who are from those areas and figuring out what does that really mean? How can we have other professions help to support the learning of literacy? Fourth, you talked about, and this is a huge one. Well, I guess they all are huge, but I started this one with unmantling, the obstacles that have interfered with learning for children of poverty, all cultures. And I want to agree with Lesley, placing a little more attention on the kids who are succeeding. What's next for them? Susan, you said, let's applaud again public schools. I think if public schools start paying a little more attention to children who succeed, some parents won't feel the need to remove their children from public education. Supporting biliteracy and biliteracy programs and the preparation of teachers, finding more teachers who have a first language other than English and inviting them in to become part of our teaching force, encouraging them, finding them in high schools, preparing them through high school on. You can go into many communities and find many kids who are seniors who have no interest, well, not interest, They have no support to go on to college, and they are fluent in multiple languages. Let's have a program to help them succeed and to have an opportunity to go to college with that. You've all said we need to continue to do some of the big studies that we've done before to grow our knowledge base about the teaching of literacy, to build family literacy programs, review the concept of what school is, that it's a place that welcomes not just a child for 5 hours, but it's a community center where parents are welcome, where families are welcome, where we care about the families too, and we partner with them as a community. And so, summing up the wonderful things that you've said, I guess we want to tell the Commissioner of Education that we want to form a panel to help support her ideas, and that we're encouraging him or her not to just have college professors, but to get real teacher educators, real principals, go to schools where you see success and ask those people, what are you doing? Because that should become the model for the country. So thank you for that question. That was welcome, wonderful. And I see that my colleague, Doug Fisher, has arrived from class right now. And so I'd like to say welcome to him also.
Thank you.
The next question that we're going to ask is, it's a question to Lisa Forehand. And so Lisa, here's a question for you because you're a principal in a low economic school. I won't ever say again a low performing school because no school you're ever in stays low performing. So I want to ask you, what suggestions can you share with teachers and principals who are going to have young children coming into the schools who have been in distant learning classrooms, and some who stayed home because they didn't feel comfortable sending their children to distant learning because they didn't have the sources or the skills to support them. So what are you going to do at your school when we ever have the good fortune of being back in a classroom to develop appropriate grade level literacy skills for all children?
So I know we're, especially, you know, down here in San Diego, we are anxiously awaiting to go back into the classroom whenever that is. However, I do think it would be a big mistake to go in panic mode where we need to assess and group and teach these kids ASAP. You know, these littles have missed almost a year of school, possibly by the time we go back. Especially the most crucial time of school, a time where they love their classroom and their teacher and they love everything about school. We're doing assessments right now for speech, and they actually come in person by appointment, one by one. And the kinders are like with their backpacks and they're like, is that my classroom? And they're just so excited to be in the school building. So we have all experienced this collective trauma, and especially these students. So I really need, I'm really going to do my best to make sure that we welcome them back properly. And so that number one is going to be to take time to build relationships, the social and emotional learning, really get to know each other, even whether they come back mid-year and they've known their teacher and classmates virtually, or whether we don't start back until fall, which I would hate to see. But, take time to nurture, build connections, form relationships. And you can do that through read alouds. You can do that through writing, that all aspects of literacy. So that's going to be number one. And setting those routines in the classroom, and because that's going to set the tone for the work that you do later. So we really can't do anything until we have our social and emotional learning and the sense of belonging and those connections formed first. And we're going to have to take the time to do that. And the other part of that would be to make learning fun. This is such a magical time. I love primary grades so much, and I taught them for a long time. Everything's magical. And so to bring that sense of magic, all of them had different experiences during distance learning. Like I know that Diane was saying, like we have students that were there every day, cameras on. We have, a handful that we don't know where they are. We have a handful that you hear them turn on the mic and you hear 10 other people in the background all trying to do distance learning as well. So they all have different experiences. So how do we bring them in to the classroom and making it fun with literacy, songs, chants, phonics games, that hands-on learning that even though I do have distance learning teachers rocking it, I think Doug Fisher will definitely agree to that. I do have distance learning teachers rocking it. However, it is different in the classroom. It's just really to immerse them in that wonderful, joyous magic of the classroom. And then number 3 is just that read, write, talk, all the aspects of literacy. I'm seeing the chat and I'm seeing a lot of people talking about that literacy is everything. It's reading, writing, speaking, absolutely. So immersing them in that culture of physically with each other, physical books in hand, whether you're reading to them, with them, as they're paired up. So just recreating the magic of the classroom that they might not have had at all. And I feel like that's what we have to make up in that short time. I think the other things will definitely come, but to me, just that sense of joy and magic that has to come with learning with that grade level. And then just immersing them in the print-rich environments, just the charts, the sentence frames, all of the wonderful supportive things that we have happening in our classrooms for students. We can't replicate at home. And so to me, that's going to be really, really important. It's going to be important work to set the stage, whether they're transitioning back or whether we're completely welcoming them to school for the first time. I do think another piece of that is the teachers. I always said, as soon as I forget what it's like to be a teacher, I will no longer lead a school. It is really important to realize that teachers have also experienced this sense of trauma as well, and they're struggling through distance learning. Even though they're doing, some of them are amazing, it's still really a struggle. So how do we support them coming back in the classroom? I'm thinking my teachers, we are going to have to assess our Fountas and Pennell one-on-one, and even if we come back mid-year, because I was helping assess and I would hear parents next to them going, the words was, and I'm like, no, you're not supposed to help them. So we are going to have to get some better assessments in person once we come back. But I'm just thinking, like, release time for my teachers. How do I give them release time to help them test their students that they're going to want to do? And then what do we do with those groups of kids? And I'm thinking my incoming first graders that might have missed the whole year of first grade. And so I know my RT and I, we've already divided up students. So we're going to start online. We're starting next week. She's going to take 3 groups and I'm going to take 2 groups, and we have 5 groups covered, and we are going to guided reading with them every single day. And so they get double, triple dosed. So how do we support our teachers as well? That's the other important piece. So like I said, I think that going into it panic mode, which is, I know we're there, I have to talk myself off the ledge often. And going into it panic mode might be the first initial reaction, but we really have to lay the foundation and do all of our social emotional learning to do right by them, because we owe them a magical start to school. I'll leave it as there.
Thank you.
There's so many comments that are coming through the chat box related to the message of gratitude for what they're referring to our attendees as the giants on the stage for early literacy. And so we also want to extend that gratitude to you. There's over 800 participants live with us right now after probably spending a day in school like Lisa, teaching and leading. And so we thank you for being here as well. This next question goes to one of our giants on the stage for literacy, which is Pat Edwards. Pat, there's so much talk about teacher preparation. What features would you like to have added to an elementary teaching credential?
For one thing, we need to add family engagement. I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was in college, people always ask, is teaching an art? Is it a science? Is it a profession? I think that teaching is all 3 of those things. Doctors collect family histories, lawyers collect depositions, architects collect a lot of information about our lifestyles. As teachers, we don't collect that much data. Families, are very, very important because schools cannot and would not exist without parents because they supply us with the children. And can you imagine finishing medical school and you've never dealt with a patient, or law school and you've never dealt with a client? In our teacher preparation programs, unfortunately, a lot of our students learn content knowledge, but they don't know how to deal with the various kinds of families that come through their doors. We need to prepare teachers to work with all different kinds of families. With a group of graduate students, I wrote a book entitled Partnering with Families for School Success. And when people think of families, they sometimes think of one type of family. There are families that do not respond to school. There are homeless families. There are incarcerated families. There are all kinds of families that come into a school building. There's reconstituted and blended families. We need to show our teachers how to talk across race lines and class lines, because so many times teachers are afraid to talk with the people and the children that they're working with. And I don't know how you can teach unless you're making those connections. We need to engage our teacher candidates to learn from families and communities. This is really interesting. When I first came here to Michigan, I was working in this professional development school. And in 1952, the school was built. And at that time, it was an all white community. The school was the hub. And so everyone was involved. When I went to the school in 1952, it was a transient and renter school. And teachers just forgot about working with the families. Schools cannot succeed because children are in school for 6.5 hours per day, but they're somewhere else for 17.5 hours. And I think we need to make sure that teachers understand children's cultures, their experiences, and then the role that families play is very enormous, both inside and outside of school. Children are best understood and supported in the context of family, culture, and community. And I know myself from teaching in all white settings for the last 30 years, a lot of my students, they are very, very comfortable talking about subject matter, but they are very uncomfortable when it comes to talking to various kinds of parents. And I tell them that you're not going to be a teacher for a long time unless you understand the communities in which you work. And you don't have to agree with everything someone says, but you must at least understand and respect where they're coming from. Students need to feel seen, heard, validated, and classroom becomes a sanctuary and one in developing learners and more likely to engage and explore if you understand their life experiences. So I would say to any teacher preparation program, it's important that we show teachers how to work with families. I know when I was in college 100 years ago, I focused on subject matter, and no one ever talked to me about how to deal with my clients. And parents are your clients or your customers, and it's important that we know how to work with these families. Teachers need to be explicitly taught how to engage respectfully with all families, especially families who have traditionally been culturally and linguistically marginalized. School should be the most inviting place in town, and so many times parents don't feel welcome to come in the building. Schools have ghosts in them, and sometimes parents hear scary stories, and so they feel that they shouldn't come in. And I think these are things that we really have to work with. We have to listen to and learn from families, recognize a wide range of family assets and families' funds of knowledge. I wrote a little book entitled A Path to Follow, Learning to Listen to Parents. And it was really interesting because when I wrote this book, I had visited one of my colleagues whose husband was a doctor. And I wanted to see how doctors interface with their patients. And so I observed this. And what I discovered is that you might have 2 senior doctors working with 4 resident doctors, and they were all discussing one patient. So I thought to myself, why is it that we could collect data and let teachers engage because you have teachers who've been teaching for 30 plus years, teachers who've been teaching for less than a year. Why couldn't they study the populations of children and adapt what they're teaching to connect with the kinds of children that are walking through their doors each and every day? It's really interesting because there's broad consensus on the importance of the family's role in education. And there have been some documented examples of teacher educators preparing teachers to work with families. And while teacher educators may agree that parents are important participants in the educational process, teacher educators too often believe that the knowledge, skills, and attitudes for working with families will just happen once they start teaching in a real classroom. Yet research has shown that teachers in classrooms are frequently just as uncomfortable dealing with families as are the teacher educators who train them. They'll say, well, you know, that's not important. You just need to focus on reading, writing, listening, speaking, spelling. You don't need to focus on all of that. Not only are many teachers uncomfortable dealing with families, but teacher educators have similarly voiced their discomfort in preparing prospective teachers to work with families. And I really find this disturbing because as teachers work in a building, it's not just the content, it's the families that you work with. And in the work that I've done over the years, I find that sometimes when teachers and parents are not on the same page, kids are the ones who fall through the cracks. And I do think we have to sometimes have difficult conversations, and teaching sometimes can be unnerving and can be also confrontational. And sometimes if you don't know how to deal with that, I mean, for the last 30 plus years, I've been teaching white teachers, and they say things like, well, I can't say that because I'm white. And I say to myself, you can't wipe yourself away, because teachers are going to be teaching in classrooms where students don't look like them, don't think like them. Like this semester in my class, I'm teaching interns. I have 17 young white women, one Asian man, and one Asian woman and one African-American woman. But a lot of my students are going to be going into those settings where they probably never talked across those race lines. And so that's why I think in teacher preparation programs, we need to give teachers practice in those particular settings. Over 15 years ago, Joyce Epstein surveyed administrators in 161 teacher preparation programs. And she reported that although these administrators thought that involving families or learning about families was important, few believed that their graduating candidates were fully prepared to do so. That they felt that they were very competent in a lot of areas, but they were not necessarily comfortable or confident in working with families. The like of examples of teacher educators preparing teachers to work with families is particularly alarming when the research literature has repeatedly highlighted the fact that parents are their children's first teachers and teachers are the second teachers. And I think the way that we can get teacher preparation programs to involve and focus on family engagement would be to require it, that in certification programs you certify and ask teachers, just as we did years ago when it came to multicultural education. People didn't think it was important. They said if you were a good teacher, you could teach anybody. That might be true, but I do think that teacher education programs need to create these standards by which we say these are things that teachers must do in order to teach in the second decade of the new millennium.
Thank you so much, Pat, for all those insights that you've gained throughout your career in so many different schools. Now I want to ask Susan Newman a question that I know she's thought about for many years. Susan, should we have universal kindergarten and preschool? And if you think so, tell us why.
Yes.
I knew you'd
Absolutely.
say that.
Without a reservation at all. And I want to thank Pat for her insightful comments and recognize that many of our students, I totally agree with what Pat was saying in terms of many of our students will say that the one thing they haven't learned in their teacher preparation program is how to deal with parents and how to deal with community, which is also interesting, Pat. So thank you for those comments. But in relation to your question, Diane, it really is so important, the early years of learning. We know so much about the brain and children's eagerness to learn these early years. And listen to these statistics, which was startling to me today. 19 states plus DC require kindergarten. We require children to go to kindergarten. 17 of those states require a full-time program, kindergarten. I'm not talking pre-K, kindergarten program. 39 states require districts to at least have kindergartens. So in other words, in some of our states, there might be kindergartens in districts, but there aren't enough of them for the children to be able to go to them. So when we're talking about universal pre-K, we also have to first talk about universal K and the fact that so many of our children, if they don't register on time, they don't get in them, and they have a year without any kind of childcare or help for their children. So why is universal pre-K and universal K so critically important? I have to give a shout out to New York. New York City has done a wonderful job with its universal pre-K teachers. I go into the classrooms and I see magic. And I see magic in a way that is not like the elementary school teaching and classroom. I see magic occur when those teachers understand the early years are different than the elementary years, where children need to learn in a different way than they're currently learning in upper grades. Frankly, oh, you're going to hate me when I say this, but sometimes I'm going to say it anyhow. Sometimes I go into classrooms and I'm bored. And I'm bored because I don't see content-rich instruction. I don't see a focus on the child and how a child actually learns in these early years. We know, for example, that children need to learn vocabulary, comprehension, phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, you know, the 5 pillars, even in the very early years. We know that. But they also need to know something else. They need to think they're great. They need to think they're the best person in the entire world and they can, you know, slay dragons if necessary. They need to see themselves as experts in a domain. And they need to feel good about themselves and their peers. They need the social emotional development, the love of their peers and their teacher. You know, very often when I go into a classroom, a child will look at me and say, I want to write. And, you know, they don't know me from Adam. But what they'll do is they start writing and they write, I love you. Because emotion and their feelings is so close to their cognition. They cannot separate cognition from social emotional, from physical development. It all goes together. And so when we think about the fact that some of our children are not getting universal pre-K and not getting K, we think immediately about the inequity that's going on in our school system throughout our country. I mean, our children are coming to school so ready to learn, but if they haven't had those early experiences, the teacher has to, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, often teach toward the middle. You know, we want to differentiate instruction, and Lisa, I know we should. But very often with 25 sweet little bodies before us, it's really tough. And so they'll teach toward the middle, neglecting the fact that so many of these children have not had the background knowledge, have not had the experience that they need prior to those instructional features. So we're creating inequity before we ever begin. And then, of course, all of us know it just compounds. So Sonia and I often talk about the importance of content-rich instruction, of knowledge in those early years. But knowledge is something that comes about slowly. It's not something like alphabet skills where I can just teach them and they go right away. It's something that needs to accrue over time. And so what that means is that we start that process in the very, very early years, and it accumulates. And soon children feel like they're expert in a domain. So my little grandson, his name is Benjamin, and he became fascinated with orca whales. Orca whales was, I don't know why, but the super topic. And when any of his kindergarten children had any question about orca whales, they knew that he was the go-to guy to answer those questions. And he became very popular because that's what happens when you become expert in a domain early on. You feel good about yourself, and that transmits to other children. And everybody has a right to believe that. So let me just end by talking about the fact that we need to rethink our curriculum for our youngest children. Too many children in kindergarten are getting first grade instruction. Too many pre-K kids are getting first and second grade instruction. We need to recognize that these early years are magical. And what that means is they need to be playful and fun. In other words, even with my graduate students, when I'm trying out new ideas, I say, let's play. And that means that there's no evaluation, there are no tests, data-driven instruction, poof, it's gone. What we do is we are playful and think about creative ideas. We integrate instruction. So literacy is never taught like and but it's integrated in meaningful content. We take into account our parents, because Pat is so right that you can't do early education without recognizing and respecting the families, not just the parents themselves, but their whole tradition and their culture. And we need to bring that into the classroom. And then finally, we need to recognize that children are inherently curious. And you and I need to spark that curiosity very early on, because I'll tell you something. If we don't, it deadens over time because they learn that they're not listened to. So listen to our young children and speak to them in a curriculum that they understand. Thanks.
Diane, unmute.
My next question is headed right over for Lesley, and she can build right on what you're saying, I think, Susan, because Lesley has been talking about interdisciplinary initiatives, but she's looking at that a little bit different than when we think about interdisciplinary and we think working with the science and the social studies and math teachers. So Lesley, I'd like you to talk about why you think it's so crucial to create interdisciplinary initiatives to make that early literacy connection.
Well, I certainly agree with Susan and how interdisciplinary can spark interest and motivation and engagement. All children need more time, I think, to be taught reading. And learning to read, for me, is the major goal for early childhood education. What else could be more important? Children who are a year behind need 120 more hours of teaching. Interdisciplinary teaching of reading instruction can provide more time. Every minute of school, of the school day, whether we are doing gym, dramatic play, art, music, social studies, science, and even math, need to be the teaching of reading. When we do teacher ed, Pat, similar to what you said, we need to drum that into our students. They need to be teachers of reading in early childhood all the time. So we need to make it interesting and meaningful. As Susan was saying, exciting. More content areas will help us learn the skills. All those skills are in content area. There's vocabulary, there's stories to read, there's strategies to help them read them. They can be written about. There are videos to watch, music to listen to, content to discuss. Basically, I was saying there's reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing in all our content. If you were teaching art, for example, and one of my doctoral students did this wonderful study, there is vocabulary. She was doing sculpting in 2nd grade, and some of the vocabulary was coil, glaze, hollow, kiln, mold, statue. And you can see these words and touch them and do them to learn the vocabulary. You can write about in your art journal about your sculpting experience. She did read aloud, such as Dave the Potter, artist, poet, and slave. And another poem she read, That's My Jar, from Etched in Clay. This interdisciplinary can go beyond content areas also. We need help in teaching to reading. We need beyond school, and this means going into other professions, and in particular, the medical profession. Pediatricians are the first to have access to the most at-risk families and for long periods of time. Pediatricians are trusted and looked to for information about everything related to children. The American Academy of Pediatricians recommends that pediatricians embed literacy into their well-child visits and practices in general. It isn't, one of the problems is it isn't mandated in medical boards. And so therefore medical schools and pediatric resident programs handle it differently, some systematically and organized, but others not so much. We need to help them develop better programs for their medical students and their resident pediatrics, because we have those skills. There are 27 million families treated at community health centers affiliated with universities and pediatricians. We need to be familiar with them, work with them. When we work in these centers, we create reading zones, which I did recently. And to get them bookshelves, I saw at the Graduate School of Education some unused ones in the hall, and I swapped them for other ones and got a Rutgers truck to bring them over to the community health center so we can help each other. And we made this gorgeous literacy center. There's a pediatric organization called Reach Out and Read. There are 5,800 programs in the United States and 29,000 medical providers involved in 50 states. They give away 6.9 million books, are distributed to 4.9 million children a year. We can help them and they can help us. I urge you to seek them out in your community and work with them. They need your help. As I said, we need their help. They have books in the waiting room for children to look at. They have volunteers reading to children. They give each child a book and an educational toy at each well-child visit. The first year of a baby's life, they get checkups every month, and then every other month, and then every 6 months, and then once a year. And so they see the pediatricians a lot. Reach Out and Read pediatricians discuss with the parents during the visit about reading to their child, talking to their child, providing experiences and activities that enhance language development and readiness for reading. And I'll tell you, some of these pediatricians really don't know what I just talked about. They can be very young and not have children of their own in school. we need to help them with this information, and they look to us. I got involved when I was contacted by Alan Mendelson, a pediatrician, to speak at a Reach Out and Read event. This might have been about 20 years ago. And he went beyond just Reach Out and Read. He developed a video interactive program. And what he did was to videotape parents reading to their children, and they could then discuss more interactive behavior as well as playing with their children with an educational toy. The parent got to take the DVD home, which they loved watching. Many of these physicians will carry out research about the work they do. And they have found that the parents involved in these Reach Out and Read programs will play more with their children at home after the program, read more to them, have more verbal parent-child interactions. The parents report feeling less stressed out about parenting. And over a long period of time, the children improve in their school readiness, improve in early reading achievement, and in behaviors such as self-regulation. So they are helping us by doing that. We can help them by offering information that they need. I'm tremendously impressed with them because the pediatricians that I've been working with actually go to our educational research. I would think that they might go to the psychology research, which is fine, but I think we do better in knowing about emergent literacy. Parents have said that they welcomed what they're learning, that they like learning alongside their children. Green Eggs and Ham was one of the books we used, and this mom said her child, just didn't eat vegetables or eggs or anything. So she made not green eggs, but she made regular eggs and put broccoli in them, and that the child was delighted to eat them because she loved the book. Another thing that the pediatricians do is they engage a large community in their research that we don't always do in education. So now I've been working with a lot of the Rutgers pediatricians, and I'm considered, they asked me to be their reading consultant, and it felt so good that I could contribute to physicians that they were seeking me out. A part of this is also medical students. There's Patricia, there's education students, Malia, high school students from New Brunswick who are reading to the children. One of them is Acredi, and this is in New Brunswick, which is an inner city community. The children in the program will be attending local schools, and so we work with them as well. And teachers are running the program, which I'll tell you a little bit about. They engage psych professors, ELL professors, professors who teach courses in literacy, as I mentioned. And the pediatricians are Emmanuel, who is the chief pediatrician researcher, Shilpa and Ushma, who are the pediatricians in the community center, and we become a brainstorming community. It is really joyful and exciting with all of these different people, and we're all very different people as well. As I said, I'm involved in a family literacy program at Robert Wood Johnson Medical Center, and again, I got involved when I met Manny at a foundation event where he was presenting. They called some of their research, one of our newest pieces, which actually is going to be presented at LRA on Friday, if you'd like to come, called Literacy Educations and Pediatricians Working Together. I just love that title. I didn't make it up. And developing a bilingual family literacy program in primary care. The purpose of this program is to help prepare preschoolers for kindergarten. The first year we did it, I wrote the program, and we're piloting it now. But we did it in person. That obviously was not last summer, but the summer before. Well, this was going to be our second summer. And guess what? We couldn't. We switched it to telephones virtually because they don't all have Wi-Fi or computers, but they have telephones. I couldn't imagine it would work, but it did. They come, there are 45-minute sessions for 8 weeks. We hold them twice to accommodate all schedules. The themes, again, the interdisciplinary are medical themes, our health themes, nutrition, exercise, bedtime routines, social and emotional help. And what do we use? We use storybooks that match these themes. There are 2 per theme. They're in English and in Spanish. We sing songs to match the themes. We discuss the themes, of course, which is good for language development. And sometimes they're speaking in Spanish and sometimes in English. The sight words match the themes, and the letters of the alphabet that we teach match the themes. And of course, there's phonological awareness, some phonics. Again, it's a bilingual program with some books in English and some books in Spanish. So for example, in the theme that deals with exercise and activity, the books that we are using are From Head to Toe by Eric Carle.
Lesley,
Yeah.
I have to jump in here because the time's running out and everybody wants to keep listening, but you'll need to put some of this, please, in the chat room because we need to move on. We have more questions to ask other panelists. So thank you for this. And it's just fascinating.
Okay. I just had 2 more words. Can I have 2 more words?
You can have 2 more words.
Thank you. Well, it's a little more than 2 more words. Está lista para jugar afuera. Sorry for my Spanish, but that's, are you ready to play outside? So words like jump and run are in the books. There are take-home kits. We text message the parents to remember to do some of the things that they do at home in the session.
Thank you so much. Yes, put it in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you, Lesley. Okay.
All right, next up is a question for Doug. Doug, welcome. We're so glad that you could be here. The question says that many colleagues in the field have committed to refining their literacy practices to be more comprehensive in light of discussions around reading foundational skills, hybrid and distance learning models, and the list goes on. What components do you believe need to be magnified?
So I want to start with this idea of learning loss, because my struggle with this phrase that is now popularized everywhere is that part of this effort to engage in comprehensive literacy includes teachers' beliefs about what children can accomplish. And if I don't believe you can learn to read at really good levels, you won't. And so I want to interrupt the conversation on learning loss. And I live in California. We have legislation on learning loss. We have supplemental funding on learning loss. But when you say learning loss, that leads us to a conversation about remediation. And some of us are old enough to remember the conversations about remediation when we retained kids in grade and remediated them with epic fails. And when we move into the remediation conversation, we start in this deficit mindset. And if we build a deficit mindset, we lower our expectations for kids. I wish instead of the narrative around learning loss, I wish we would talk about acceleration. How can we accelerate the learning of young people? How will we do this? What will be a comprehensive literacy effort? All hands on deck to ensure kids are learning. So I wish we would stop saying there's a loss, there's a gap, there's remediation, and there's a deficit. Because if we continue this narrative, we are granting ourselves permission to lower expectations for children this year. And that is a dangerous path to head down. Australia and New Zealand have released their national assessment data on distance learning. They closed schools like we did. There was no loss in learning, despite the rhetoric that there would be a loss in learning. The only loss that occurred, not in mathematics, not in reading, was in writing, because by and large, it became an oral conversation and writing instruction dropped off. Well, yes, there's a relationship between instruction and learning. Today, NWEA released their report of 4.4 million children in the United States. 4.4 million kids. There was no loss in reading compared to last year, despite the rhetoric of loss of learning, because teachers are amazing and teachers are doing what it takes. And I would like to confirm Lisa Forehand's comments about her teachers. They are engaged in heroic efforts to get kids to read online. Now, NWEA, to be clear, says there's a percentage of kids that we didn't test. We don't know if their districts didn't sign up or some kids in poverty didn't have access. We don't know, but the test numbers are lower. But 4.4 million kids last year to this year with no loss in reading, maybe we're heading down the wrong conversation with this gap, deficit, and loss. And I understand distance learning is hard. This is not what I want to be doing. I do not want to be standing in a spare room and presenting and talking. I want to be with you all again. So don't hear me say, I hope distance learning is here forever. I say it's how we think about it. I think it's how we think about children's achievement. That's the first part of our comprehensive literacy effort, the belief that we have the power to get kids to learn. Technology is the tool. So are textbooks. They're a tool. So are lesson plans. They're a tool. It's us. It's the decisions we make that we intentionally move that learning forward. That's what makes a difference. Now, when you say comprehensive, and Susan named all the parts, they all have to be in play. Now, what the National Reading Panel didn't pay attention to is oral language. And I think that was a mistake. In retrospect, they should have included oral language, the value of growing listening comprehension. And right now, in distance learning, we are seeing huge amounts of attention on oral language and listening comprehension. And if this doesn't go on a long, long time, if we grow our young kids, kindergartners and first graders and preschoolers, if we grow their listening comprehension and then we build strong foundational skills, we could actually have higher achievement than we had in the past. Because I'll go back to 1984 and an influential study, not mine, one I read, around listening comprehension and the ceiling of reading comprehension. And if you don't continue to accelerate a young person's listening comprehension, it can set the ceiling for their reading comprehension. And so maybe as their phonics, phonemic awareness, and fluency grows, their understanding of vocabulary grows, their ability to think about what the text is saying, what the author's saying, how they think about that, if their listening comprehension has been stretched from these amazing experiences they're having, when we really teach all those foundational skills, maybe they're ready for it. They have the world language. They have the experiences. They have the concepts. And we actually can do it. I watched one of Lisa's teachers teach one of the strongest phonics lessons I've ever seen, with all of her kids at their own homes, holding up dry erase boards so their teacher could see their work. They're not going to be harmed because that teacher believes that her kids will learn to read. That first grade teacher believes in her heart, I will do what it takes because those children will learn to read. We can do this. We did not forget how to be teachers. We know the components. We just need tools to access our learners. That's what we need. We need to still have lessons that are based in getting kids to read and write and speak and listen. The other aspect that was neglected, and they said so in the National Reading Panel, was writing. The flip side of the coin. Writing is super important. How do we not let writing suffer right now? So the Australian and New Zealand data says that's the area where gaps are existing now. Writing. Please teach kids to write, to compose. Don't skip that. Have them start off with transitional spelling. Analyze their writing for patterns. What do they have under control? Where do they need to go next? If they can write it, they can read it. A colleague of mine years ago said, every writer can read, but not every reader can write. So how can we build those experiences? How do we broaden that lens? I'm going to harken back to James Flood and Diane's Lapp work. Reading, writing, speaking, listening, and viewing. That's a comprehensive view of using language to communicate with other people. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Doug, for that. I hope that you can just maybe answer some of the questions that have come to you in the chat. Thank you for that enlightening presentation. I know that's what some of the things we're doing at our school. Our next person is Kia Brown-Dudley, and I would do, and it's been touched on just a smidge, what role does joy have in early literacy learning?
Thank you, Diane. So I'd like us to think about what is joy, right? It's a feeling of extreme gladness, delight, exaltation of the spirit arising from a sense of well-being or satisfaction. So when I think of early learning, I think of active joy, which involves a desire to share one's feelings with one another. It's associated with authentic engagement. And so to answer the question, early literacy learning, all learning really should be joyful. As literacy educators, we share our love of language, literacy, listening, speaking, reading, and writing with our students. If you reflect for a moment about when you've experienced joy in the classroom, what was happening at that time? And for me, my most memorable moments with students are when we are in a state of flow. Everyone is so involved in the activity, so present in what we are doing that nothing else seems to matter, right? There's this balance between skill, challenge, the process is enjoyable. When I think about how young children learn and develop, and this has been touched on by many of the speakers, there's this thread of active joy, or some have mentioned the magic that you see in early childhood classrooms. And so when we think about relationships with responsive, nurturing adults, right, that being able to share in the joy of learning is key. Active hands-on involvement, so learning through play, exploration, experimentation, and interaction with people and objects to make sense of our experiences. And also that self-directed learning, right? Really having the relationships with our young students, knowing what's important to them as a learner and creating those experiences. And then also, you know, little children are always asking why, right? They are inquisitive, they are natural learners, and they have that joy. And so they are always trying to construct meaning. And so we are there to support them and help them figure out how to make sense of the world. I will say I am an anthropologist by training, undergrad, and I really adhere to Street's ideological model, which views literacy as a social practice, right? And the ways in which people address reading and writing are rooted in conceptions of knowledge, identity, and ways of being. And so when we reflect on the literacy practices we use today, thinking about modeled experiences, shared, guided, thinking about creating that classroom community and a culture that really nurtures a love of reading, that's where the joy and magic happens for early literacy. And so I could talk about this forever, but I know we are short on time. So I will close with a quote from Brene Brown, who really talks a lot about joy. And joy comes to us in moments, ordinary moments. We risk missing out on joy when we get too busy chasing down the extraordinary. So if we just focus on those ordinary moments with our students and focus on joy, magical things will happen.
Kia, thank you so much for those insightful words. I noticed the chat is just coming alive from your presentation with the words joy and then following Doug's focus on the word believe. If you could put believe and joy together, we can do anything. Sonia, last but not least, I get to ask you the final question. So what instructional techniques and approaches should we be focused on for any of our at-risk early literacy learners?
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate my colleagues' comments very much. I hope that in my answer, I see pieces of a lot of what was said in my answer to this question here. First, we need to make sure all learners have access to instructional approaches that have an evidence base, where research has accumulated over time to show that a particular strategy or type of instruction works to improve students' skills. And much of this has been summarized in practice guides produced by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the research arm for the US Department of Education. For example, we know that there's strong evidence that explicit and systematic phonics instruction improves children's ability to decode words, and students should have opportunities to read connected texts every day. But I also want to highlight some areas that have promising evidence in terms of early literacy instruction, but don't necessarily receive a large amount of attention. And some of you have brought this up today. To make learning more comprehensive, I really think that there are two really neglected components. One is early writing. And when I think about early writing, I think about it in preschool and kindergarten. You know, we have a laser-like focus on reading, but we don't consider writing as much in the early years. And if we're thinking about accelerating children's literacy learning and reading, I think that there is a lot of power in early writing. And the early writing includes things like composing, spelling, and handwriting. And sometimes teachers focus a lot on handwriting, but it's really composing and spelling that most relate to children's outcomes, reading outcomes. So for example, research shows that providing scaffolding for children's invented spellings can result in both better spelling and better word reading. And when teachers provide support for children's writing, it also helps to differentiate the instruction they receive, because teachers can meet students where they are. So if you're thinking about those learners, you know, not teaching to the middle, but teaching to where students need it, writing is such a concrete way that where you can do that. So it's important for children to engage in those kinds of opportunities every day. And the other important area that I feel like is neglected is making sure comprehension is a clear focus in the early grades before children are able to decode proficiently. And so language skills are important to comprehension, and background knowledge is important to comprehension. There's some promising evidence, like I said earlier, around integrating the two of these things to boost outcomes. And some of the key ways to do this, one key way to do this is through content-rich interactive read-alouds that can build both language and knowledge. So Lisa said earlier how these things build, you know, relationships as well through these read-alouds. That interaction with children is critical to their skills, to their ability to learn to read. This can be done with books that are more syntactically complex than what they're able to read, with different genre, including informational and informational narrative texts, and conceptually coherent text sets with books designed to systematically build children's knowledge over time, and explicitly teaching the relationships among words, so that when children encounter words again in different texts, it deepens their understanding of words and related words.
Thank you so much, Sonia. So I'm gonna actually, in our last minute together, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and Diane's gonna tell you where this came from. And I also wanna say that I would add to this believe and joy, because that definitely came out in our discussion as well this evening.
Mute. This Wordle we had so much fun putting together. We were going now to ask every one of our panelists to tell us 6 words that they thought would really tell their position on early literacy and where our focus should be. And we decided, fortunately, to ask them early in the day. And so these are the things that they all said, and then Ken put together a Wordle. And these are, as you can see, the key issues that we've talked about today. Helping, think, children, write, read early. And so that's where this came from. The only one we didn't get a chance to add in was Doug. And I think that we can say from Doug's, we could add in believe and teach them. So teach them all.
Absolutely.
Doug, do you want to add a word or two since you didn't get in? Did I say it correct for you, or you're putting, yes, we've worked together a lot of years, so I believe that's what he would say. Believe and teach them.
So in our closing remarks today, I just want to have a tremendous thank you to all for this conversation this evening. Please keep an eye out on the ILA Digital Events webpage for on-demand content and upcoming webinars and learning opportunities. If you're not already following ILA on social media, make sure that you do so for the most up-to-date information. I also wanted to include some other facts that you should know about. If you enjoyed this event, the ILA Next primary pathway is on demand through January 31st. Many of our panelists tonight were also very actively involved in that program. We also want to provide your attention to resources that were initiated during the ILA presidency of Doug Fisher. They're available on the ILA website at literacyworldwide.org. If you click on Get Resources and then click on Instructional Practices, under the Families and Communities link, many of those resources are highly focused on early childhood. Also, if you haven't joined the ILA Next primary pathway and you want a sneak peek at some of the resources that were compiled, you can access them at tinyurl.com/primary pathway, and it'll probably make you want to join and get access to that on-demand content. Also, many of you submitted questions during the event, and also some of you have submitted questions prior to the event. ILA is currently reviewing those questions, and we're going to be sending them out to our panelists for future blog opportunities, so your voices are heard. In closing, I also want to thank the ILA staff for helping with a successful digital event. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the attendees, and we hope that you have a great week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.